3. So thank you to the organizers of this wonderful session, and thank you all for taking the time to listen to my talk. I apologize that I couldn't be there. Maybe you can tell from my voice, I'm getting over a cold. It wasn't COVID, but thanks again for taking time to listen to my talk. So today, I apply the concepts of practice and embodiment as part of a broader relational approach to archaeology. And I do this to understand how inequality was institutionalized at the archaeological site of Tzunun in Chiapas, Mexico. The community of Tzunun was inhabited by the Mayas primarily during the late post-classic to early Spanish colonial period. The site is also heavily fortified, with settlement clustering around peaks in the local topography. I argue that the ancient inhabitants of Tzunun worked with their environment to create layer upon layer of defense that in turn promoted social inequality. Within a heavily guarded settlement, elites occupied the highest and most well-defended terrain, while exposing the rest of the population to greater levels of violence. These varying levels of protection inscribed inequality in the landscape and perpetuated it across generations. To build my argument, I provide some brief background on the archaeological study of inequality. Next, I outline my relational approach to the study of martial practice with landscapes and embodiment. Then I delve into the case study at Tzunun in Chiapas, Mexico. The study of socioeconomic inequality has been a staple of archaeology. V. Gordon Childe highlighted in the early 20th century that by understanding patterns in the production and distribution of artifacts and features, we can paint a picture of past socioeconomic organization. This type of analysis has been highly productive, leading to a wealth of insights from many parts of the globe. For example, in the study of the ancient Mayas, the size and elaboration of structures can be paired with the distribution of associated foreign or exotic items to determine status distinctions within a settlement or across communities. In a post-classic context, one would expect elites to live in dwellings made of greater quantities of masonry versus perishable materials, and have greater access to metal, jade, marine shell, and other exotic or long-distance items. Through this type of analysis, researchers have demonstrated of socioeconomic differences within and across Maya communities, including the post-classic Mayas of the Petén Lakes region or highlands of Guatemala. And highlighted in this work, among others, is the importance of connecting sacred geography with cosmology and socioeconomic analysis to understand past inequality. Beginning in the formative period and continuing into subsequent periods, access to and communication with the converging vitalities of certain places, such as mountains and mountaintops, like you see on the screen, access to these places was integral in the creation and maintenance of status distinctions within Mesoamerican communities. So, for example, the Templo Mayor in Tenochtitlan was the embodiment of Coatepec, or the sacred mountain where Huitzilihuapochtli, a primary deity of the Mexica, battled his sister in order to be born and survive. The Templo Mayor, as a sacred mountain, also took part in practices of human sacrifice that viscerally and ideologically reinforced the power of the imperial Aztecs over others. I think it is safe to say that those of us who work in Mesoamerica would accept that cosmology, along with economics, played an important role in the institutionalization of inequality in late formative, classic, and post-classic Maya communities. My research builds on these two staples of Mesoamerican archaeology. So one is socioeconomic analysis of architecture and artifacts. Two, the study of sacred geography and cosmological landscapes. And then I add a third component, martial practice. By martial practice, I mean the study of how past people made war. As Justin Bracken and I highlight in an upcoming special section in the journal Ancient Mesoamerica, critical to the study of martial practice are questions of how past Mayas prepared for and engaged in combat, which necessarily entails an analysis of landscape. My approach to landscape builds from the work of Wendy Ashmore and Tim Ingold to think about human experience with an interactive world. In other words, the tangible and intangible world are not a passive, inert substrate for the unfolding of human agency. We make culture and ourselves with the dynamic, active worlds we inhabit. This includes landscape or the places where humans dwell and make meaningful lives. As we interact with landscape and make places for ourselves, which are relationships we perpetually develop and maintain over the course of our lives, we actively embody the landscapes that we inhabit. This embodiment of landscape is fundamental to, for example, the strontium isotope analysis, which measures the chemical signatures of local water, soil, and plants that become part of our own bodies. Making a place for ourselves in a landscape involves numerous activities that in some cases includes preparing for war. Through the construction of fortified communities, the landscape can embody humans as well. Bringing together the different strands of my research, I argue that the practice of fortification, which is a process of creation and maintenance, reveals how humans and landscapes form relationships in which we actively embody or shape and become a part of one another. And now I'm going to turn over to the case study of Tzunun in Chiapas, Mexico, in which I argue that landscape, architecture, and martial practice combine to institutionalize or create intergenerational inequality within the community. Tzunun is an archaeological site located within the Metzabok portion of the Naha-Metzabok UNESCO Biosphere Reserve. The reserve is home to contemporary Lacandon and Celtal Mayas who live in the town of Puerto Bello, Metzabok. Locals are the on-the-ground stewards for various Mexican federal agencies and are collaborators in all of my archaeological fieldwork. As part of a broader program of community archaeology, all the data I present today was collected with the permission of and collaboration with the Mayas who live in Puerto Bello, Metzabok. Tzunun has some important qualities that made it a place where past Mayas built a fortified community. The site is a peninsula that seasonally becomes an island when local lake and river levels rise during the rainy season. Moreover, the site is rugged and mountainous. To understand the topography, one must go up and then down and then up some more while being careful not to fall off the occasional precipice or steep edge. Today, I will present a brief discussion of my research on martial practice. A more in-depth analysis of how the Mayas prepared Tzunun for war can be found in my dissertation and a forthcoming publication in ancient Mesoamerica, which I mentioned earlier. So within Tzunun's rugged, watery setting, late post-classical Mayas created a layered defense that incorporated local topography and hydrology. Multiple masonry walls block the southern land route into the site. And so for would-be attackers, the gentlest slope into the site is blocked by two dry laid masonry walls that are marked with the red squares in the image on the right. And the narrow corridor into the site is flanked by two ridges. And this narrow corridor where the arrow is pointing is currently used by local Maya to patrol the UNESCO Biosphere portion of Metzabok. And if we look again at the map, you can see that the blockaded path is part of a series of walls that run along a ridge. I have marked that ridge along with its walls with the black square on the right. So in addition to those walls up on the ridge, I've also marked in shades of purple a ditch that runs across the spit of land, on the southern spit of land of Tzunun, and also an earthen mound that is located in front of the narrow corridor that I just mentioned. So both of those are marked on the bottom of the screen in different shades of purple. And these two features might have been fortifications, but through extensive sampling, we were not able to recover datable materials. In fact, the ditch and mound were essentially sterile, despite many trench excavations. So thinking in terms of martial practice, the warriors would likely attack Tzunun during the dry season. Otherwise, they would need to engage in an amphibious assault. The land route into the site is blocked by multiple masonry walls, and the ditch and mounds might have added to the site's fortifications. If Tzunun's perimeter barricades were breached, then attackers would have to contend with a broken and rugged physical environment. Within this mountainous landscape, higher terrain would have provided more layers of protection. And so now I turn to a discussion of who occupied the most heavily fortified places in the community. During the late post-classic and early Spanish colonial period, the site's highest peak played an important role in shaping Tzunun's social life. Excavations of the summit revealed evidence of an architectural group that formed the political administrative heart of the community. In this group, the architecture on the summit is aligned with the temple, and I've drawn that alignment for you with the red line in the image on the right. So to reach the peak, a person would have to climb stairs that led to a building and platform that likely restricted access to the summit. And on the peak is a 3-meter tall building composed primarily of limestone. Based on surface reconnaissance, only the temple group below contains a masonry building taller than the architecture on the summit. Excavations reveal that in order to create the 3-meter tall building, Tzunun's inhabitants leveled the peak. Excavations of the peak also reveal the general lack of artifacts. The cleanliness of this area is one line of evidence to support the peak was a public administrative area. So based on epigraphic, iconographic, and various other lines of evidence from across the Maya area, we know that temple control and protection was vital for the maintenance of elite status. So turning back to Tzunun, the general lack of artifacts on the peak, along with the alignment of the 3-meter tall building and a temple, provide evidence that the site's highest peak served as a private space for elite political administration and ritual. From the peak of the site, elites, perhaps rulers, could look down upon the activities that took place in the temple group below. Tzunun was also socially stratified in terms of material wealth. On the second highest hilltop, located west of the area that I just mentioned, local Maya and I mapped large masonry basal platforms that together form a patio group. Excavations revealed large quantities and varieties of artifacts, including high status items such as metal, greenstone, and marine shell. Further sampling of dwellings around this apical or peak group revealed excavations of varying status. And so to briefly give a more balanced perspective of social life at Tzunun, I now will discuss a low status residence located along the slopes below the second highest peak, so further down from where I was just talking about. And in this area, we excavated a platform that was the base of a structure with a low bench. We recovered a majority of artifacts from the single phase of fill used to construct the platform. This residence contained the greatest quantity and weight of hute shells in my sampling universe. And hute shells are the carapace of snails that were eaten by the Mayas. The building and platform had a domestic function because we uncovered a grinding stone and everyday household items during excavations. Compared to other households we excavated, we did not find a large quantity of high status or exotic items. The scarcity of these items substantiates that we excavated a low status residence. So in terms of status in the rest of the site, the rest of the dwellings that I sampled fell somewhere between what you see here in this group and then the high status occupation that you see on the peak. So there's a spectrum within the community that falls between these two poles. So from AD 1200 to 1600, Tzunun was a socially stratified community where elites maintained and instantiated their power by occupying elevated terrain. During this period, people of high status built their home on Tzunun's second highest hilltop, and people of varying statuses lived at lower elevations. Tzunun's inhabitants also leveled the site's highest peak to create the political and administrative heart of the community. Thus, findings from two apical groups reveal evidence of high status occupation on summits. By living on peaks, they were not only channeling the powerful cosmological associations of mountains and mountaintops, they were also occupying the most well-defended terrain in the community. Through practice with the landscape, inequality was embodied by the land itself. This landscape continually structured the lives of future generations because through their everyday practices, locals could literally look up or down from their homes to see their place in their social hierarchy. Thank you very much.